All right. Well, welcome to this week's career chat session about strategic marketing. We have Shirley Yager, Director of Product Marketing at Qualcomm, who's also an alum of both our undergrad and our graduate MBA programs. So she's been kind enough to join us today to talk about her career path and to share some advice about breaking into her industry, not just in product marketing, but also the tech industry as well, because it presents its own challenges. So Shirley, just to get us started off, if you don't mind, just tell us a little bit about your background and how did you choose the profession that you're in now?
So I started off as an accounting major, actually, when I first started here at San Diego State. Took 1 year of accounting and decided I hated it. And so I changed majors. Back then, I thought marketing was all about sales, and I wasn't that interested in sales, so I wasn't a marketing major. I thought finance was way too close to accounting, and so I chose not to be a finance major. And so the only thing left for me at the time was a management major. So at my undergrad, I was a management major. Once I finished with my degree, my bachelor's degree here, I landed my first job at Qualcomm.
All right, great. Can you just describe your role as a director of product management? What is involved in that role?
So product management is a huge role. And typically product managers are responsible for a product. So you're the CEO for that product. You're responsible for, bringing it to life, launching it, and then at some point it dies, right? Or it transitions into something else. I've done all of those types of roles in my life at Qualcomm. And right now I'm in the group at Qualcomm that's responsible for technology licensing. And so our product is the intellectual property that Qualcomm owns. So all of the patents that the engineers file, we make money on those patents. We license it out to a variety of different companies for the privilege of using our technology, and they pay us for that. So my role there is to look at new licensing programs outside of cellular.
All right. And so you mentioned you've been through all of the stages of the product market life cycle. Some of those beginning stages involve a lot of research, and there's the go-to market strategies that you put together, evaluating growth opportunities to begin with, whether or not to pursue those. Can you just elaborate a little bit more what's involved at the strategy stage there?
Yep. So, at the beginning, a really smart engineer will have an idea for a product, right? They might have tinkered with something in a lab and they think, it's a great idea that could potentially make millions of dollars. So I come in at that point and I validate whether or not their technology idea has any legs and has merit and potentially something that we could make money off of. So I do an awful lot of research. Primarily secondary research. I research use cases. So, I look at how the technology can be used in a variety of different ways. Who would also be potentially a competitor to us in those areas as well. And then if we have to do some primary research, we will. We typically don't do a whole lot during that stage, but so there's a lot of analysis done on understanding the market, understanding the use case, understanding if it solves a problem that a customer would find valuable. We do a lot of financial analysis at that point too. We do a lot of projections to try to determine if we can make money at this, how would we make money at this? And so we do some pricing exercises. Qualcomm is never a company that charges the lowest price possible. We try to charge as much as we can for our technology and our products. And so we will model different pricing schemes to see, what makes the most sense. We will challenge those models to see, in a best case scenario, what would be the upside? In the worst case scenario, what would be, the downside? And then, we try to flesh out also some early requirements for the product.
All right. When I did marketing at Caesars Entertainment, we didn't really have a strategy team in the local property that was in the corporate offices in Nevada. But I got to do a rotational program where I got to sit in with advertising, with the promotions team, with the direct marketing team, operations, and do all of those different things. And I think when people think marketing, a lot of times they're thinking about those types of positions and the more creative side of things. And in product marketing, you get to be on that analytical area early on and then move into the more creative side. What would you say to those that are thinking about doing product marketing versus a more traditional role like that? What do you think the value is choosing your path versus one of those more specialized roles?
So you can certainly just do general marketing, right? Every company needs general marketers to come up with a brand for the company, design some kind of strategy for the company on, how it comes across to people, how it wants to be known to the market in which it serves, things like that. So, you're not really responsible for a product per se, but you're responsible for the company's reputation, what people think about it, how, the competitors might think of a company. In product marketing and in product management, you're more focused on the product itself. What messaging do I formulate about that product? What do I want people to feel and think about that product? And how is it different, or how does it stand out from the company's look and feel, right? Sometimes you have to be in alignment with that. But depending on what it is, you could also be in direct contrast with that. And then you have to figure out, so how does that then affect the company, right? So, in a general marketing type of a role, you're just responsible for, I guess, more general things, company reputation, company's look and feel, how it comes across to the public. When you're focused on a product, is a little bit different because you want to make sure that product succeeds, right? And so your messaging and your campaigns are all about making that product come to life and succeed.
One of Qualcomm's flagship products right now is Snapdragon.
Yes.
Now the name of our new stadium over on our West Campus. It's a pretty cool name, and it's catchy. I would imagine the product marketing team probably had a hand in helping select a name like that. What's involved in that part of the process when you're like, okay, now we got a viable product. What are we going to call it?
Yeah. So coming up with a name for a product is a very interesting exercise. I mean, you can kill a product by its name, right? Snapdragon, when it first came out, it's really just a flower, right? It's a tall stalk, and it's a pretty cute looking flower. But over time, instead of branding it as like we're a flower, we chose the dragon part of Snapdragon and made it come to life more. So if you see any graphics on Snapdragon, you'll see something that looks more like a dragon. But he's a friendly dragon. He's not, your mean dragon that you might see in some video games or something like that. And so, branding a product or even a company logo brand type of a thing is a really tough exercise. People know Intel really well because there are laptops and devices that say Intel inside, right? You don't see a lot of products that say Qualcomm or Snapdragon inside. And so, Qualcomm has a big push right now on trying to brand the Snapdragon name and make it more well known to consumers.
Yeah. Really interesting, but I'm going to shift gears a little bit from the product side. Well, maybe the SDSU product side now. You have your MBA degree,
Yep.
And I'm curious at what made you decide to come get your MBA, and how have you leveraged it in your career?
So I graduated from San Diego State in December, And I landed my job at Qualcomm in February. So 2 months after I graduated from here, I landed my first full-time real, I call it my real job. And 1 week after I started working there, my boss calls me in his office. He goes, you need to go back and get your MBA. And I said, I will, but I want to work for a year before I go back and focus on school again. He goes, no, you're going back now. And I said, why? And he said, because the folks that work at Qualcomm, 60% have master's degrees or better. And for you to really be successful here, you need to go back and get your master's. He said, I don't care what you get your master's in, just go back and get some. And so by this time, it's late February, early March, school has already started. And I said to him, if I go back now, I don't even know if I can get in. And he goes, find a way, just go back. And so I did. I contacted, at the time it was San Diego State Extension. I signed up for a graduate class in a business class. I crashed it. It had already been underway for over a month, so I had a lot of catch up to do. And the good thing is my boss was very supportive of me coming back and getting my master's. He got Qualcomm to pay for my master's program. He said, so long as you get an A or a B, we'll pay 100% of it. But if you do any less than that, we pay only 50%. So I was lucky. Qualcomm paid for me to come back and get my master's, and they paid for the whole thing.
That's great. So great benefit to keep in mind when you're shopping for places is that companies that support you with your continuing education, it's a really big value that sometimes is overlooked a lot. So now that you're in a director role, let's say you have a young, promising employee, would you give them the same advice?
I probably would, yes, because it has worked to my advantage. As you grow in your career, and even now, if you look at, director level positions at other companies, right? A lot of them will ask for a master's. They don't necessarily care what master's degrees you have, but they typically will list a master's as a requirement. So getting a master's, you'll check off that box. Certainly at a company that has a lot of smart people like Qualcomm, I mean, 60% of their employee population is a pretty big number that have master's degrees or better. As a company, it was founded by a former professor who taught at MIT and then later on at UCSD. And so, education was highly valued is highly valued at Qualcomm. So yeah, a master's degree certainly works to your advantage.
And Qualcomm is the largest employer here in San Diego, but I think they're also very representative in that philosophy of the biotech and other tech that is prominent here in San Diego. So if you're looking to go one of those lines, I think that's really good advice to follow. The one thing I usually add is because I have a lot of undergrads that are ready to just jump right into the master's, and I say, make sure that you have a purpose for getting that master's. Because it's really hard to leverage the degree if you just get it with no purpose. So speaking of which, one of the questions that was asked you by one of our students was, should I specialize when I get my master's? And you had mentioned that, yeah, I think it's a good idea because it helps me understand how you're going to fit. Tell me a little bit about, well, if you could repeat what you had mentioned to our student about how you specialized here at SDSU and how that helped you in your career path.
Sure. So, having gone through the program here at San Diego State as an undergrad, I know you have to take, the first couple of years here is general education, right? The second half of your time here as an undergrad, you start to specialize in whatever it is you major in. And I think that's great. You get to, whether it's finance, accounting, marketing, whatever, you start to specialize in that. You take more classes that are in those areas. If you get a general MBA, it's very much like your undergrad work, right? It's very, the first few classes are prerequisite classes that get you into the upper level or upper division classes. And as an employer, we know that they're very general. So when you focus and concentrate on something, then I know you've been sort of whipped in shape. You get to know finance, marketing, management, whatever, at a much deeper level. Hopefully more of your classes were taken, in that discipline, so that you have a deeper appreciation and knowledge of that discipline, if that makes sense, right? And so, now I know how how I can use you in a work environment, right? If you have a general degree, it's hard for me to say, how I want to use you, unless, you've done something at school that is unique in a way that it proves to me that, oh, I can use them in this role or in a different role.
Very good point that you bring up outside of the classroom. So you sit on multiple nonprofit boards, or at least have sat on multiple nonprofit boards. It's not required for your job. So tell me, how does that serve your career, and why do you think students should also look to develop themselves outside of school and the classroom in similar type of ways?
Sure. So I've been working in my role for over 20 years, right? I've been at Qualcomm for over 20 years. I've also at one time left Qualcomm to work at a startup. I had a load of fun at that startup. I've also had an opportunity to work in a privately held company that had about 800 employees. And so I've had a chance to work at a publicly traded, worldwide company like Qualcomm. I've had to work in a small startup company, consisted of 3 people, me and 2 others. And then, what you might call a medium-sized company with 800 employees. So I've had a chance to get a breadth of experience in all of those areas. And so a lot of my experience, at this point, I've kind of seen everything. I've done almost everything. And helping out nonprofits and serving on boards is a way for me to take the knowledge and experience I've gained through my day job and apply it to a mission or to a cause that I find a lot of passion behind. And so, that's how I've been able to use that. And it's actually the work that I've done for some of these nonprofits that I find more interesting. It gives me purpose when I wake up in the morning. My job is my job, and I will continue to do that as best as possible. But it's the work that I do for nonprofits that is more exciting, that I find to be more interesting. It has different challenges than my day job at Qualcomm. And so those are the things that are different. And, I also mentor students from San Diego State. My way of giving back to this school that has given me so much is, I volunteer as a mentor. And each semester I get 2 students who pick me as a mentor. And I will tell you the same thing I tell them. San Diego State has 36,000 students here. You guys need to find ways to stand out amongst those. When I come here to recruit students, when I come here and talk to students at career fairs, I can't tell you how many of you sound exactly like the last one I just talked to. And the ones that I will call back for an interview are the ones that stand out, the ones that did something different than everyone else here at San Diego State. You guys have taken the exact same classes from the exact same professors. You've taken the exact same exams. I can't tell any of you apart, right? You've heard the same lectures. I want a student that has done something different. I want to know that you had a leadership position in a club. I want to know that you competed on behalf of San Diego State, perhaps. And I'll tell you, that's how I landed my job at Qualcomm. As an undergrad, I participated in a business plan competition where the judges were VPs and executives from other companies, and I had to present my work to a company that I, created their business plan and marketing plan. I had to present it, and then they had 30 minutes to ask and tear my plan apart. And I had to stand there and justify it to these executives and for 30 minutes. And I won the regional competition. And that led me to go to the international competition, and I came in second place. So I represented San Diego State in competition, and I got to talk about that in my job interview. And that stood out because I was one of only 4 students who did that. And so, you know, the fact that I could defend my work to executives from other companies who had way more experience than I ever had at that time, Qualcomm found valuable.
And it's not just a student activity. When I was at Caesars Entertainment, I was a part of several task force where we'd be looking into improving some part of the business. And there was one task force where we were presenting to the executive team where everybody else couldn't make it to the presentation. They're either sick or not there. So I had to defend our entire plan to the whole executive team. So doing stuff like this in school, you know, gives you a safe zone to do that in. It's much harder when your job is on the line. So I think that's really great advice. Also, in terms of mentorship, I just think that's really crucial to a career, that, you know, whether it's an outside mentor or somebody within your organization, that it's really important to find that mentor. Shirley, have you had mentors at Qualcomm or other places, and how have they helped shape your career?
Yep, I certainly have. So the folks that I look for a mentor are folks who I admire. So I've had a few folks that I've had the fortunate chance of working with who I thought were really, really smart, who I thought, you know, knew a lot more than I ever did, and I would connect with them. And those were the people who, in the work that I do, before I would ever present to an executive at Qualcomm, I would take my presentation to this person and I would say, I need you to criticize the heck out of me. And I would present and I would share my work, and they would give me valuable feedback. You know, they might say, I wouldn't say it this way, I would say it this other way instead. Or I would change your slide to show something else, right? That kind of advice is very valuable. You know, they provide you with insights into things that you may not have thought about. You know, they challenge you to think differently. And so those mentors are extremely valuable in terms of your work product. I also have had mentors of people who I felt handled themselves really well in crisis situations or in political situations at work. And I watch them. I try to emulate them. I try to, you know, really think about how a certain person might have handled a difficult situation, and I try to model their behavior. So, you know, 2 types of mentors, right? One that helps me with EQ and with personalities, and you know, working with people at a level that you know, is different than others. And a mentor that will help me, you know, become a better me from a work product standpoint, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so you could be the smartest person in the room per se, although I like Shirley's advice is finding someone smarter. You know, if you're the smartest person in the room, find another room. But you can be the smartest person in the room, but still not be perceived that way by other people. How you interact with people is really important. And so, you know, you have that mentor, as you said, that can help you with the technical, you know, part of your job, but they may not be the best person to help you with the other aspects of your job. So great advice. What kind of tools and skills are essential to your job? Now, every company, this might be different. They might be looking for something different, but at least for you, Shirley, what tools and skill sets are kind of critical?
Yep. So a lot of my work gets presented to the C-level executives at Qualcomm. So I might present that, or somebody else, you know, my boss, for instance, might present it. I create slides or reports that eventually flows up to the top. Something that is very valuable is to say things in a very terse and succinct way to executives. So your C-level executives might have just come out in an interview with, MSNBC, or they might have just, had to present to our board of directors, or, executives are very busy people. And if I'm going to present to them, I need to be very direct and on point. And there's a skill to do that, right? You need to extrapolate all of this extraneous data and say it in a way that that is to the point and makes the statement that you want it to make. Otherwise, they lose interest. They almost have ADD, right? They're so busy. They want to, they start to hurry you up. And when they do that, they're not listening anymore. They just want to hurry up and get this conversation over with. So learning how to be direct and on point and very succinct and to an executive is something that's really important.
All right. I want to revisit what you said a little bit ago about standing out. Because that's something that I'm always teaching each of you too. So if you worked a resume with me, for instance, I'm telling you that it's not good enough to have a great resume anymore. You're now, especially for our grad students, competing against other grads. So how are you going to be better than them? And that's really important. So when you can think about hiring at Qualcomm, what are some of the things that the people you have hired have done to set themselves apart as candidates and stand out?
So during the interview process, I'm going to ask you about situational questions, right? I'm going to ask you, so tell me about a time when you had an idea that wasn't well received. I want to hear your experiences, right? Tell me about a time when, you were in a sticky situation. How'd you work yourself out of it, right? I get that you might be a brand new grad, but I'm also hoping that you've encountered some of these situations as part of your educational process, right? School is always a safe place to fail. And school is a great place and a safe place, to learn a lot of these things. And if you can handle an interview where you're asked to give me a situation that you were in and you made it better or you turned it around, I'm much more interested. But if you don't have anything that you can share with me, then it also tells me your experience is very, very limited, right? I get it that everyone has to start somewhere, but I'm hoping that your time at school gave you an opportunity to go a little bit above and beyond, right? Not just take the required courses and then you're out of here, right? I'm hoping you took some time to experiment. I hope you are taking some time to kind of stick your neck out a little bit and challenge yourself. Because that's the way it is at work, right? I don't want to have to micromanage someone who's working for me. I want to have confidence that if I'm not there, you're going to move forward, right? One of the best advice my first boss ever gave me at Qualcomm was, if I'm not here to make a decision, I expect you to make it. And then I expect you to be able to back it up, whether it's the right decision or the wrong decision. I expect you to be able to justify it later on to me. And he says, I will never yell at you for making the wrong decision. It just needs to, you had to have had good justification for it. And school gives you that. San Diego State is a great, safe place to try those things out. And hopefully, a good place for you to find your passion too. I get a lot of students here. I'm a marketing major. I'm about to graduate. I'm looking for a job. What do you want to do? I don't know. A good mentor will help you work through that. But, hopefully you find your passion. Hopefully you know what you would like to do and what you don't want to do. before you get to the year before you graduate, right?
So one of the points that Shirley was making about standing out is your approach to how she asks you these questions about failure, right? Things that you might not want to talk about. And I think that's one of the harder things for our students. They feel like they talk about their failures, that it's going to brand them as a failure. Whereas if you approach those type of questions right, you say, yes, I'm human, I made a mistake, but this is what I did to remedy the mistake. So if someone like Shirley ever asks you anything that's raised in the negative, tell me a time that something didn't go right. Always talk about the things that you did afterwards, because that's what separates you from everybody else. Is if you can tell them that you got up and you made things better, those are the type of people that we generally are going to want on our teams. And Shirley and I have this in common, in that we talk with a lot of entrepreneurs. And the successful ones, I don't know, they probably say the same thing to you, but they're always telling me the difference between me and the non-successful entrepreneur is every time I failed, I learned from it and got back up and did it again, where other people would walk away. The failure would scare them.
Yeah. You learn from your failures, right? And if you have failed at San Diego State where it's safe to do that, I'm hoping that you learn from that experience and you bring that experience, to your workplace. I would rather you fail here than at work, right? When you fail at work, it could cost millions of dollars, right? Not all failures do that, but I think you get the idea, right? So it's okay to fail. Just understand what you learned from it, and you move on, right? You don't let that failure consume you entirely.
You also had mentioned standing out by doing things outside of the classroom. And one of the easy, I shouldn't say it's easy, but low-hanging fruit, like it's right there for you, are student organizations. So what kind of student organizations do you recommend, or do you like to see students get involved in?
Hopefully it's related to whatever passion that you have, right? If you're a marketing major, you might want to consider joining the American Marketing Association. There's hundreds of clubs here. There's not hundreds of student organizations here. Hopefully you're doing something that is in alignment with what you're crazy about, right? What's something that you're passionate about. And if you think you might be passionate about it and you join it and you discover that it's not something that you want, that's great. That's good to know, because when you then look for a job, you don't want to do that, right? Or you need to at least reassess what you thought you were going to be, really good at, and discovered that, it was not what you thought it was going to be. So clubs are really good. I would also encourage you to get involved in some community initiatives, whether it's through a nonprofit or whatever. So there was a talk earlier this week that I was involved with some engineering students, and a lot of them were very very eager to put into practice the things that they learned in the classroom, and they were looking for opportunities. And they this one particular student exhausted the student clubs and just thought, I want to do something else. And he was a software engineer, and so I said, why don't you go help out the first robotics program? They have teams that would probably love your insights into coding, and how do you make a robot work, and how do you get the robot to move the way you want it to do through software. Volunteer your time and help out a FIRST robotics team. And FIRST is a great nonprofit that is well known in the tech space of working with kids to introduce robotics and STEM concepts to them. And so hopefully he takes that advice and can kind of move on. But those are the kinds of things that gives you something to talk about when you interview. You can say, hey, I volunteered, I helped the robotics team come up to speed on programming, I helped them with computer-aided design, or whatever it is, right? You can talk about that. That's also work experience. You may not have gotten paid for it, but it's still work experience.
Great. Again, this is just really excellent advice. I'm glad that we brought you in because our students do need to hear these things. When our students come to meet with me and I'm helping them try to figure out their career goals, how to reach them, the best path there. I always tell them, yes, I can help you with your resume. I can do practice interviews with you, but the number one thing that you can do that's going to change your life, not just to get your next job, but to help you throughout the rest of your career, is networking. How has networking served you in your career, and would you recommend that as well to our students?
So there's a great book that's entitled Your Network is Your Net Worth. And that is very, very true. Your ability to connect with people and connect with other people that those people know is going to be your greatest asset. I've been fortunate that in my career at Qualcomm, I've been able to move into a bunch of different roles into a variety of different business units. And I've been fortunate enough that I've done that through networking. Now, at the time, I didn't realize it was networking. At the time, I just thought I was just meeting people and getting to know them and them getting to know me and stuff like that. But I've had the good fortune that when new positions came up in certain areas, people would say, oh, I know someone who'd be perfect for that. Let's call Shirley and see if she would be interested, right? My entire time at Qualcomm has been that. I mentioned I left Qualcomm to go to work for a startup for a little while. And I was away from Qualcomm for about 3 years, when out of the blue one day I get a phone call from a man, my current boss, and said, I'd like for you to consider coming back. I heard you're really good at doing business analysis, and so let's talk about you coming back. And so that was all through networking. He knew someone who told him, he met with someone who I know, and he was saying, I'm trying to find someone who can do some opportunity analysis and come up with new licensing programs and whatever. And that person said, I know just the person. Shirley used to do that, and she's really good at it. And so that's an example of how one person who I knew told another person who had a need, who then called me, right? Your networking is at some point you're all going to graduate and you're all going to be looking for a job. And how are you going to find that, right? The easiest and fastest way to land a job is through your network. Knowing someone who knows about an opening somewhere that might be the perfect fit for you, right? A great example here, Greg, you introduced a student to me about a year or so ago who was graduating from the MBA program here. He was a former Marine, and he left the Marines, came here to get his MBA, and he was getting ready to graduate, and he wanted a full-time job. You introduced him to me. I got to know him. We got to work. We fine-tuned his resume, and now he's working full-time at Qualcomm. And so that's a beautiful example of how introducing and networking with people leads you to a job, right? So yeah, I can't stress that enough. Networking is an important function throughout your life. It doesn't just end once you land your job. The promotion process requires networking. It's not just your manager who decides whether or not you get a promotion. It's everyone else in that room who decides whether or not you get promoted, right? And if the person doesn't know who you are or doesn't know anything about you, you may not get promoted. So networking is something that is integral,
There's that old saying, not what you know, but who you know, which I would say, yes, it is what you know, but I would tweak the part of the who you know. And I'm stealing this from one of my mentors. Change that to who knows you. It's what you know and who knows you. And that the important difference between the who you know and the who knows you is connections aren't enough. It's not enough for me to be connected with Shirley and expect her to do something to advocate on my behalf, whether it's to one of her employers. There really needs to be a real relationship there, so go and meet the person that you want to be your mentor, the person that you want to refer you for jobs, whether it's coffee or lunch or however you do it, but create a connection, or go beyond that connection, create an actual meaningful relationship. It's a professional relationship, but create a meaningful relationship with that person. And then it will come back to, help you in the ways that Shirley described. And so my challenge to each of you is you're meeting Shirley today. And I hope that, you will have an opportunity to create deeper relationships with people like her. But don't let it stop at Shirley. Go out and meet at least 10 other people like Shirley before you graduate. And if you do, I promise you, by the time that you graduate, you're going to have a pretty nice opportunity lined up. And if you don't, come to my office, we'll talk. Maybe there's just some things that you need to tweak about how you're managing your network that could help change things for you. So I want to give our students a chance to ask their questions, but before I do, is there any last piece of advice that you want to kind of impart upon our students before they start challenging you with some of their ideas?
Well, I'll just kind of echo what you just said, right? When you network, authenticity is important, right? It's not just a one-way street. You meet me, you want something from me, and then you go on your way, right? The real relationship here is what's important. The authenticity of that, networking is a two-way street. At some point, the person who did you a favor, you should repay that favor in some way, right? Whether it's lunch, or whatever, right? I always offer the people who I meet, and people who have done things for me, something, right? Don't ever hesitate to let me know how I can help you, right? Because at the end of the day, your network is gonna be a part of your success story.
Speaking of which, I probably owe you a lot because you're here today. You're over at the Zip Launchpad earlier before. You're helping our students that I referred to you. So your equity is building up with SDSU. We appreciate it a great deal. So I'll open up the floor. Just feel free, raise your hand and go ahead and ask, what are the burning questions that you want to know from Shirley?
Quick question about chips and semiconductors in general. So in developed Asian countries, as I understand it, the general consumer cares a lot about what chips in their phone. So they're actively pursuing Snapdragon, but the American consumer typically doesn't care as much. How is Qualcomm leveraging the new Snapdragon branding to develop that differentiation in what is typically a commodity market in the US?
So in the US, all the phones sold here have our chips in them. Unless you buy a really, really low-end phone, every phone here that you buy through Verizon, T-Mobile, has our chip in it. So you may not know that, but I mean, even your Apple iPhone has our chip in it. Now in the future, Apple's trying to get around us. But we'll see how successful they are at that. In Asia, they're more focused on the brand of their phones than the actual chip that's inside of it. There's a lot of phones in Asia that look very similar to the Apple iPhone, because that was kind of like your Porsche, right? When you drive up in a Porsche, you have, this a certain reputation that comes with owning a Porsche. Well, if you had an iPhone, same thing, right? And so a few years ago, a lot of handset manufacturers were selling phones in Asia that looked exactly like the iPhone. So they're more concerned about the brand name on the phone itself.
Interesting question, because that brings up kind of the divide between business direct to consumer and B2B, where Qualcomm's model, developing these really important integral components, they're selling to other businesses who really need to rely on it, and they don't need to worry as much about what those consumers themselves are. I would say not at all. I mean, because ultimately the companies won't come to you if the consumers care zero about it. For Qualcomm's positioning is really more of what is going to attract that company to want to put our chip in the phone.
Right. So our technology in the chips enables your cameras to do the things that the great things that they can do, like, removing. You probably have seen the TV commercials where, the iPhone and the more recent Google phone. Yeah, you can actually delete things off of those pictures, right? Well, guess who made that capability possible, right? So it's through the capabilities that's inside that chip that enabled that to happen, right? The ability to take use your camera at night and take better pictures at night, right? I mean, we did that. We pushed it out. Now, your handset manufacturer has to enable that. They need to make that come through. Some do and some don't, right? But you just like there are in cars, you've got your low-end cars and you've got your very high-end cars, right? Phones are exactly the same way. You've got very low-end basic phones that don't have a lot of these whiz-bang features, and then you have phones that will do everything except the dishes in your house, right?
Really great point about marketing in general is, when you're dealing with a technical product, the average consumer really isn't interested in how you make it happen, but they are interested in what you're able to make happen. And that's really kind of the selling point. So it's not necessarily the chip itself that you're selling them to, but do you want your phone to be able to do this? Well, then you're going to need Qualcomm's Snapdragon to do that, right? Other questions?
Kind of tying back to that, with you're saying iPhone, for instance, uses chips on it. How do you guys how is there a differentiation between them? Like, is there like silicon binning or something that how there's like a regular product you guys have, and then for instance like Apple, but they name it like an A10 processor or whatever they call it, but it's still built by you guys. How do you have any understanding of how the differentiation occurs between the two, and how, like, for instance, it doesn't say Qualcomm on it, but it is built by you guys. How is that different from a product that is produced that does have it?
So in the chip world, the kinds of chips that go into these phones, there's primarily three types. There are the processors, the CPUs themselves. There's the modem. So there's the chip that actually connects you to the cellular network or to the Wi-Fi network, whichever network you're on. And then there's the integrated chip that has both a processor and the modem on there. So instead of buying two chips, you buy one, right? So Qualcomm makes all three. Apple is putting out their own processor chip. So in their phones, it's their processor with our modem. Yeah, they used to buy our integrated chip with processor with modem. But they decided that they wanted to compete, basically. And they're trying to also manufacture or design and develop their own modem chip. They've not been successful to do that. Designing a processor is very different than designing a modem. The ability for all these, zeros and ones and bits of data to fly over a cellular network is very different than having a processor be able to figure out, 2 + 2 is 4, or, that kind of stuff on your phone. So there are companies out there that are trying to compete with Qualcomm in that way, or at least pay less to Qualcomm for the technology that is going inside their phone.
I always thought it was interesting. I knew you guys produced this stuff, and I never understood why they would try to hide that. Like, they would put like their own on top of it. I'm like, you guys are like one of the biggest companies that do this. Like, when I think of processor phone, you guys are synonymous for that. Like, that's all I think of. And I thought it was weird that they would do that.
Yeah. So they got rid of our processor and instead are just using our modem. because they haven't been able to develop their own. Any others?
As you said, like product management, like product marketing, you're focusing on that one product. So what were one of the most like difficult products that you had to work on to vouch for and make as much like the most money that you can make for that product? And what product was most successful that you personally
That I had a
worked on?
hand in?
Yeah.
I would say that I was on the team that had everything to do with data. So, when I first joined Qualcomm, phones were primarily used as a voice device. So if you were running late, you would use your phone to call, your family and say, I'm running late, right? You would use your phone to actually talk to another person. Imagine that. Texting was probably the only other thing that you could do on your phone that was data related, but texting was also difficult because, the number 2 was ABC, the number 3 was DEF. And so, you had to press some of those buttons 2 or 3 times to get the right character. So Qualcomm engineers had found a way to enable high-speed data networks, be a part of the cellular network. And so I was on the team to figure out what's the killer app that would get people to use data more often. And so, I looked at a lot of things. It was, everything from the ability to send pictures to being able to download, special ringtones for your phone. And just, I must have looked at like 100 different applications that you could use data for. And I picked gaming. And people started using their phones for games early on, using a high speed, at the time it was 3rd generation network. And so I picked that product category as the first killer app. And then entertainment was sort of the second one. So I can't tell you how much money Qualcomm made on just selling 99-cent ringtones that people would download to make their ringtones unique. So, I mean, those were some of the early things that I did that, still exist today, right? Now you use your phone for a lot more than just gaming, right? You use your phones, it's your life. You don't leave home without it. And if you do, you feel naked, right?
That was a great hiring manager question, right? You'll be hiring on Shirley's team later. Other question?
I have 3 questions. The first one, how important the GPA on getting a job, the GPA?
I've never had anybody ask me my GPA.
And the second one, which specialization are the most in demand, like actually? And the third one, what do you think about students who specialize like in specific area, but they didn't have undergrad background, for example, specialize in accounting or in IT, but doesn't have like a background in computer science, for example, specialize in IT. What do you think about that, the MBA?
So the way I'll answer that question is a little bit different, right? Qualcomm is a big technology firm here, right? More than half of the employees are engineers. I don't have an engineering degree. The only exposure I have to anything related to engineering are the science classes that I took, at school. But I landed at an engineering company. I had no idea what cellular was. At the time, I didn't even own a cell phone. But I landed at a company that was highly technical product in a very different market at the time, right? Your ability to learn and your ability to catch on to new things is really important, right? And so I mentioned earlier how I represented San Diego State at competition. And when I interviewed at Qualcomm, that discussion came up a lot. And they understood that the work that I had done while I was at San Diego State was always different. The competition, when I went to competition, I had done a business plan for a nonprofit. That was trying to grow and was trying to, get more donors and stuff like that, right? Nothing to do with Qualcomm. But it's the skills that I took to put a business plan together for that nonprofit. And how do you raise money? How do you get money without fundraising, right? There are plenty of grants out there, for instance. How do you, reach your community that you want to serve, right? They took that as, okay, she can learn, right? She can pick up on things pretty quickly. And you'd be surprised. I'm not an engineer, but I work with a hell of a lot of engineers, right? I couldn't write a technical paper if I tried, but I know how to talk about engineering principles and concepts in a very layman's terms, right? And so I wouldn't get too hung up on whether or not you have a background in something. If you can prove to an employer that you can apply the knowledge in different ways, or that you have the ability to catch on and to learn quickly, I think that's all you really need.
Yeah, great advice. The one thing I would piggyback on it is, in addition to showing that you learn quickly, show the initiative too, so when I was at Caesars, I keep going back to Caesars, but I guess because that was where I did marketing. When I was at Caesars, I wanted a chance to experience the data team, and they were using Microsoft Access, which I think is kind of antiquated now, but that's what they were using. And I said, have you ever used it before? And I'm like, no. So after that interview, I went out and I got a book, just went to Barnes and Nobles. I learned Access as quickly as I could. And then the next time I met with somebody, I was functional with Microsoft Access, and that impressed them. They knew that, well, one, it was a demonstration of how quickly I could learn something, to what Shirley was saying. And two, they liked that, look, if we give something to Greg and he doesn't know, he's going to find the answer, and so that can be an impressive thing too. Great questions.
From a marketing perspective, is Qualcomm going to have a role in Web 3.0? And how would they leverage the ambiguity of the emerging technology and virtual reality?
So yes, our chips are inside the headsets that Meta or Oculus produces. It's our chip that basically gives you that graphical capability that you see when you put one of those headsets on. So Qualcomm is not going to put together the end user application for VR. There are plenty of other software developers out there that will do that, but we'll give you the enabling technology that a software developer can piggyback on and build on and create whatever, application or use case that a headset might bring. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Anyone else?
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Shirley, thank you so much for coming and imparting some really incredible wisdom. It's experience, but it's also, something innate in us to be able to have such a successful career. I know we all measure success differently, but I think that you're highly successful, and I appreciate you sharing some of the secrets to your success with our students today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today.
So with that said, we will sign off.